In the quiet village of Street Mary's Hollow, a scream shatters the sanctity of Street Ensound's church. A housekeeper lies dead in the sacristy, her throat slashed, a silver chalice overturned in a pool of blood. Who could commit such a crime in a sacred place? Was it the stern doctor hiding financial secrets? His trembling wife, clutching a damning letter? Or the shadowy figure lurking in the asylum's west wing? Enter Hercule Poirot and Miss Jane Marple, unraveling a web of lies, blackmail, and betrayal. As clues mount a pearl earring, a wax smudge, a hidden patient, will they uncover the killer before another life is lost? Chapter 1. The Shadow Sanctuary. The village of Street Mary's Hollow nestled in the soft folds of the English countryside, where the spire of Street Ensound's church pierced the sky like a silent accusation. It was a place of quiet dignity, where ivy clung to ancient stone and the air carried the faint scent of damp earth and fading roses. The church, with its weathered gargoyles and stained glass windows, stood as the heart of the village, a sanctuary of peace, or so it seemed until that fateful Sunday in late October. The morning had dawned crisp and golden, the kind of autumn day that promised hearty lunches and brisk walks. The congregation gathered for the 11 o'clock service, their murmurs filling the nave as they settled into pews polished by generations. Miss Jane Marple, a slight figure in a lavender coat and a neatly pinned hat, sat near the back, her sharp eyes scanning the familiar faces. She had come to Street Mary's Hollow at the invitation of her old friend, Lady Beatrice Cranford, who resided at the grand but crumbling Cranford Asylum, a former manor-turned-private sanatorium on the edge of the village. Lady Beatrice, a widow of considerable charm and dwindling fortune, had hinted in her letters of unsettling matters at the asylum, and Miss Marple, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human nature, had accepted the invitation with quiet curiosity. The service proceeded with the usual rhythm, hymns sung with varying degrees of fervor, a sermon on forgiveness that drifted into platitudes, and the rustle of hymnals as the congregation prepared for communion. Miss Marple observed the villagers with her customary detachment. There was Duke Ernest Hargrove, the asylum's chief physician, a man of stern demeanor whose gold watch chain gleamed against his waistcoat. Beside him sat his wife, Clara, her face pale and strained, her gloved hands twisting a lace handkerchief. Across the aisle, young Evelyn Marsh, the asylum's head nurse, whispered to her fiancé, Thomas Reed, a local solicitor with a nervous habit of adjusting his tie. In the front pew, Lady Beatrice herself, regal in black silk, nodded approvingly at the vicar's words, though her eyes darted occasionally to the side door, as if expecting an intrusion. The side door, Miss Marple noted, led to the church's sacristy, a small room where the vicar prepared the sacraments. It was an unremarkable door, painted to match the oak paneling, but something about its slight ajar position caught her attention. A faint draft, perhaps, or the shadow of movement beyond. She made a mental note, her fingers resting lightly on the worn leather of her prayer book. As the service ended and the congregation rose, a piercing scream shattered the calm. It came from the sacristy, a sound so raw and anguished that it froze the villagers in their places. Dacre Hargrove was the first to move, striding toward the door with a physician's instinct, followed closely by Thomas Reed and the vicar, Mr. Clement. Miss Marple, though slower in her steps, followed with a measured pace, her mind already sifting through possibilities. The sacristy was a scene of chaos. On the stone floor, sprawled in a pool of crimson, lay the body of Margaret Poole, the asylum's housekeeper. Her throat had been slashed with brutal precision, the blood still spreading across the flagstones. A silver chalice, overturned, gleamed dully beside her, its contents mingling with the blood. The vicar gasped, clutching his chest, while Clara Hargrove swayed and clung to her husband's arm. Evelyn Marsh, her nurse's training evident, knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse that was clearly absent. Good heavens, Lady Beatrice murmured, her voice steady despite the horror. Who could have done such a thing? Miss Marble's eyes, sharp as ever, took in the room, the narrow window, tightly latched, the heavy oak table, undisturbed, the sacristy door, which had been ajar but now stood open, revealing the crowd gathering outside. She noted the footprints in the blood, too many, now, to be distinct, and the absence of any weapon. The chalice, she thought, was curiously out of place, its position suggesting it had been dropped rather than placed. Mon Dieu, a voice said softly behind her, rich with a familiar Belgian accent. Miss Marple turned to see Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit and polished shoes at odds with the grim scene. His mustache twitched slightly, a sign of deep thought. "This is a most distressing affair, is it not, mademoiselle?" "Mr. Poirot." Miss Marple's surprise was genuine, though tempered by her quick recovery. "I had not expected to see you here." "Nor I you," he replied, his green eyes gleaming with interest. "I was summoned by Lady Beatrice, who wrote of certain irregularities at her asylum. But this," he gestured to the body. "This is a crime of passion, perhaps, but also of calculation. The method, it is precise, and n'est-ce pas?" Miss Marple nodded, her mind aligning with his. "The sacristy is a curious choice for murder," she said quietly. "A sacred place, yet violated. And during the service, when all were present." "Precisement," Poirot said, stepping carefully around the blood. "The timing, it is significant. Everyone was in the church, yet someone slipped away. We must establish the order of events, the alibis, the motives." The local constable, a young man named Harris, arrived, his face pale as he surveyed the scene. "I'll need statements from everyone," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "No one leaves the church until we've sorted this out." Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile. "A wise decision, constable. But allow me, Hercule Poirot, to assist. The little grey cells, they are already at work." Miss Marple exchanged a glance with him, a silent agreement forming. The villager street, Mary's Hollow, so tranquil on the surface, hid secrets as dark as the blood on the sacristy floor. And together, they would uncover them. The congregation was ushered back to the pews, their whispers rising like a tide. Miss Marple sat once more, her prayer book forgotten, her mind cataloguing the faces, the gestures, the fleeting glances. Dacre Hargrove's stern composure, Clara's nervous hands, Evelyn's pale determination, Thomas's restless energy, Lady Beatrice's guarded calm each held a piece of the puzzle. And somewhere, hidden in the details, was the truth. As the church clock struck noon, its chimes echoing through the stone walls, Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill. A crime had been committed, a life taken, and the game of deduction had begun. Chapter 2. The crimson stained the air in Street Anselm's church grew heavy with unease as the congregation sat, confined to the pews by Constable Harris's orders. The sacristy door had been closed, but the image of Margaret Poole's lifeless body lingered in every mind. Whispers rippled through the crowd, a mix of shock, fear, and curiosity, while the faint scent of incense mingled with the metallic tang of blood that seemed to cling to the air. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes moving from face to face, noting the small betrayals of emotion, a tightened jaw, a fleeting glance, a hand that trembled before being stilled. Hercule Poirot, standing near the chancel, conferred with Constable Harris in low tones. His neat figure, with its polished shoes and immaculate suit, seemed incongruous against the ancient stone of the church, yet his presence commanded attention. The constable, young and earnest, scribbled notes as Poirot gestured subtly toward the sacristy. "The scene must be preserved, mon ami," Poirot was saying. "The blood, the chalice, the footprints they speak, if one knows how to listen." Miss Marple, though seated some distance away, caught the gist of their conversation. She admired Poirot's methodical approach, so like her own, though flavored with his particular flair for the dramatic. Her own method was quieter, rooted in the observation of human nature, honed by years in Street Mary Mead. She thought of Margaret Poole, the asylum's housekeeper, a woman known for her efficiency and reserve. Who could have hated her enough to kill her so brutally, and in such a sacred place? The vicar, Mr. Clement, approached the congregation, his face ashen. "My dear friends," he began, his voice unsteady, "this is a terrible tragedy. We must remain calm and assist the authorities. I shall lead us in a prayer for poor Margaret's soul." As he spoke, Miss Marple's attention shifted to the front pew, where Lady Beatrice Cranford sat, her posture rigid, her black-gloved hands clasped tightly. Beside her, Dick Ernest Hargrove stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable, though his wife, Clara, seemed on the verge of collapse, her handkerchief now a crumpled ball in her hands. Evelyn Marsh, the head nurse, whispered something to Thomas Reed, who nodded curtly, his eyes darting toward the sacristy door. Miss Marple made a mental note of their proximity, their hushed exchange. Secrets, she thought, were already beginning to surface. Poirot, having finished with the constable, approached Miss Marple, his eyes bright with purpose. Mademoiselle Marple, he said, bowing slightly, your presence here is most fortuitous. You have, I understand, a gift for seeing what others overlook. Perhaps you have observed something already. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Only that people are rarely what they seem, Mr. Poirot. Margaret Poole was not a woman to inspire such violence, yet here we are. I wonder what she knew or saw that made her a threat. Poirot's mustache twitched. Precisement. The housekeeper, she is often invisible, yet she sees all. The keys to the asylum, the routines, the private moments, she would know much. But come, let us examine the sacristy once more before the police disturb it further. They slipped away from the murmuring congregation, entering the sacristy with care. Constable Harris had stationed a young officer at the door, who nodded reluctantly at Poirot's request. The room was as they had left it. Margaret Poole's body lay still, the blood now congealing around her. The overturned chalice caught Miss Marple's eye again, its silver surface gleaming under the dim light from the narrow window. She knelt, careful not to disturb the scene, and studied the chalice's position. It was dropped, she murmured, but not by accident. The angle suggests it was placed after the fact. Poirot nodded, his eyes scanning the room. And the weapon? A blade, sharp and precise, yet it is not here. The murderer took it, or hid it well. He stepped carefully around the body, noting the footprints now smudged by the earlier rush of onlookers. The floor, it tells a story, but it is muddled. Too many feet, too much haste. Miss Marble's gaze fell on a small detail, a single pearl earring, half hidden beneath the edge of the oak table. It was delicate, with a tiny gold clasp, and it did not belong in a sacristy. Mr. Poirot, she said softly, pointing. This is not Margaret's. She wore no jewelry today, and this is too fine for a housekeeper's wages. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he crouched to examine the earring. A clue, mademoiselle, and a significant one. A woman was here, perhaps, or someone wishes us to think so. He slipped a handkerchief from his pocket and carefully retrieved the earring, wrapping it with care. We shall keep this between us for now. As they returned to the nave, Constable Harris was organizing the congregation for questioning. Poirot took charge with a quiet authority, suggesting they begin with those closest to Margaret Poole. The doctor, the nurse, the solicitor, Lady Beatrice, they knew her best, and as Sipa. Their alibis, their movements, they will tell us much. The first to be questioned was dear Hargrove, who stood stiffly before Poirot and Miss Marple in the vestry, where they had set up a makeshift interview space. I was in my pew throughout the service, he said, his voice clicked. Clara can confirm it. I heard the scream, like everyone else, and ran to the sacristy. Poor Margaret, she was already gone. And you saw nothing unusual before the scream? Poirot asked, his tone mild but probing. Nothing, Hargrove said firmly, though his eyes flickered briefly toward the door. The service was ordinary until that moment. Miss Marple tilted her head. Dear Hargrove, Margaret Poole managed the asylum's household. Did she ever mention anything troubling? A disagreement, perhaps, or something she overheard? Hargrove's jaw tightened. She was competent, kept to herself. If she had concerns, she didn't share them with me. Poirot exchanged a glance with Miss Marple. The doctor's brevity was telling, his composure too controlled. As Hargrove returned to his pew, Clara was called next. Her hands shook as she sat, her eyes red-rimmed. I was with Ernest the whole time, she stammered. We were together in the pew. I didn't see anything, I swear. And yet, Poirot said gently, you seem most distressed, Madam Hargrove. More than one might expect for a housekeeper's death. Clara's gaze dropped to her lap. She was kind to me, she whispered. Always polite, always discreet. It's horrible, what happened? Miss Marple noted the word discreet, filing it away. Discretion, in a place like Cranford Asylum, could be a dangerous quality. As Clara laughed, her steps unsteady, Poirot turned to Miss Marple. The wife, she knows something, but fear holds her tongue. And the doctor, he is too certain, too precise. We must watch them both. The interviews continued, each villager offering a variation of the same story. They were in their pews, heard the scream, saw nothing. Yet Miss Marple sensed the lies beneath the surface, the half-truths woven into polite responses. Evelyn Marsh claimed she was adjusting her hymn book when the scream came. Thomas Reed insisted he was distracted by a loose shoelace. Lady Beatrice, composed as ever, said she had been focused on the vicar's sermon, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease when asked about Margaret's duties at the asylum. As the church clock struck 2, the congregation grew restless, but Poirot and Miss Marple remained undeterred. The earring, the chalice, the missing weapon, these were pieces of a puzzle, and the picture was beginning to form. Somewhere in Street Mary's Hollow, the killer sat among the innocent, their secret hidden behind a mask of grief or indifference. And Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom and Poirot's relentless logic, knew the truth could not stay hidden for long. Chapter 3. The unexpected LED afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Ensign's Church, casting fractured colors across the pews where the congregation waited, their patience fraying like an old tapestry. The murmurs had grown sharper, laced with irritation and fear, as Constable Harris continued his methodical but plodding interviews. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the back, observed the shifting dynamics with her usual quiet intensity. She noted how dear her Hargrove's stern gaze followed his wife, Clara, who sat hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor. Evelyn Marsh, the head nurse, whispered urgently to Thomas Reed, whose nervous habit of adjusting his tie had become almost rhythmic. Lady Beatrice Cranford, ever the poised aristocrat, maintained a serene facade, though her fingers betrayed her, twisting the jet beads of her bracelet. Hercule Poirot, however, was not in the nave. He had slipped away to confer with the constable in the vestry, his small, precise figure moving with the confidence of a man who knew his purpose. Miss Marple admired his focus, though she preferred her own method, watching, listening, letting the threads of human behavior weave themselves into a pattern. She was about to rise and join him when a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Miss Marple, I presume? Said Captain Arthur Hastings, stepping into the pew beside her. His boyish face, now touched with gray at the temples, carried a mix of surprise and delight. I'd heard you were visiting Street Mary's Hollow, but to find you here, in the midst of this ghastly business, well, it's a stroke of luck. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with amusement. Captain Hastings, how unexpected. I might say the same of you. Are you here with Mr. Poirot? Indeed I am, Hastings replied, lowering his voice. He wired me last night, said he was coming to the village on a matter of some delicacy. Didn't expect to walk into a murder, though. His expression sobered as he glanced toward the sacristy. Poor woman. Poirot's already got his little gray cells in a whirl, hasn't he? He has, Miss Marple agreed, her tone thoughtful. And I suspect you, Captain, will be of great help to him and perhaps to me. You have a knack for seeing the human side of things, which is often where the truth hides. Hastings flushed slightly at the compliment, adjusting his cufflinks. Awfully kind of you to say so. I've just arrived from London, you see, at Lady Beatrice's request. She's an old friend of my late aunt's, and she wrote to me about some concerns at the asylum. I thought I'd pop down and have a look, but then Poirot got wind of it and insisted on coming along. And now, this. Miss Marple nodded, her mind cataloguing this new information. Lady Beatrice seems to have summoned quite a few of us. I wonder what troubles her so deeply that she felt the need for such varied assistance. Before Hastings could reply, Poirot emerged from the vestry, his eyes bright with purpose. Ah, Hastings, mon ami. And Mademoiselle Marple, you are still here, observing all, I trust. He bowed slightly, his mustache quivering with a hint of amusement. I have persuaded Constable Harris to allow us access to the asylum. The scene of the crime, it is here in the church, but the roots of it, I suspect, lie in that place of healing or perhaps of secrets. The asylum? Hastings said, his brow furrowing. Do you think Margaret Poole's death is tied to something there? Poirot's eyes narrowed. Everything is tied, Hastings. The housekeeper, she was the eyes and ears of Cranford Asylum. She saw what others wished to remain hidden. She heard the whispers in the corridors. And now, she is silenced. But Hercule Poirot will hear what she cannot say. Miss Marple inclined her head. I agree, Mr. Poirot. Margaret Poole was no ordinary housekeeper. Her death in the sacristy, during a service, suggests a desperate act, someone who could not wait, or who wished to send a message. Precisement, Poirot said, his voice low. And so, we go to the asylum. Lady Beatrice has agreed to open its doors to us, though I sense she is not entirely pleased. Come, Hastings, Mademoiselle Marple. Let us see what secrets the walls of Cranford hold. The trio left the church, stepping into the crisp October air. Cranford Asylum stood a short walk away, its grey stone facade looming at the edge of the village like a sentinel. The building, once a grand manor, had been converted into a private sanatorium for the wealthy and discreet, its high walls and gated entrance giving it an air of seclusion. As they approached, Miss Marple noted the overgrown gardens, the ivy choking the iron gates, and the faint air of neglect that clung to the place despite its reputation for care. Lady Beatrice greeted them at the entrance, her black silk dress rustling as she led them into the grand hall. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, Captain Hastings, she said, her voice smooth but strained. I am grateful for your presence, though I wish it were under happier circumstances. Margaret was indispensable. Her loss is a blow to us all. Poirot's eyes scanned the hall, taking in the polished marble floor, the heavy drapes, and the portraits of stern-faced Cranfords gazing down from the walls. Madam, your housekeeper, she was trusted with much, yes. The keys, the schedules, the private affairs of your patients. Lady Beatrice hesitated, her fingers tightening on her bracelet. She was efficient, yes. She managed the staff, ensured the patient's needs were met. But she was not one to pry. Miss Marple's gaze softened, though her mind was sharp. Yet a housekeeper sees much, Lady Beatrice. A misplaced letter, a late-night visitor, a locked door left ajar. Did Margaret ever mention anything unusual? Lady Beatrice's lips pressed into a thin line. Nothing specific. She was loyal, discreet. If she noticed anything, she kept it to herself. Poirot's mustache twitched. And yet, someone did not trust her discretion. Tell me, madam, who was in the asylum this morning, before the church service? Lady Beatrice frowned, as if the question surprised her. The usual staff, dear Hargrove, Evelyn Marsh, a few orderlies. The patients, of course, though most are too frail or confused to leave their rooms. I was here until 10, when I left for the service. Margaret was preparing the staff's tea. She said she would join us at church later. And did anyone see her leave? Poirot pressed. I don't know, Lady Beatrice admitted. I assumed she followed us, but with the crowd, I didn't notice. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Poirot. The timeline was murky, the movements unclear. Margaret Poole had been alive at 10, yet dead by noon, her body discovered in a sacristy that should have been empty. The asylum, with its locked rooms and silent patients, held the key to her final moments. As they moved deeper into the asylum, Poirot paused at a heavy oak door marked staff quarters. Mademoiselle Marple, Hastings, let us begin here. Margaret's room, her belongings they may speak where she cannot. The room was Spartan, with a narrow bed, a small desk, and a wardrobe. Miss Marple's eyes fell on a locked diary on the desk, its leather cover worn but intact. Poirot, with a nod to Constable Harris, who had followed them, requested the key from Lady Beatrice. She hesitated, then produced it from a chain around her neck. As Poirot opened the diary, a single sheet of paper slipped out, folded tightly. He unfolded it with care, revealing a list of names and times, written in Margaret's neat hand. H. 凌晨2点, West Wing, 真斜杠21 Garden, Midnight, 真斜杠22 T.R. Library, 晚上1点, 10-24 Miss Marple's breath caught. A record of movements, she said softly. Margaret was watching. And someone knew. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Indeed, mademoiselle. This is no mere diary. This is a map to a murderer. The asylum's walls seemed to close in, their secrets pressing against the silence. As the trio left Margaret's room, the weight of the investigation settled upon them. Someone in Street, Mary's Hollow had killed to protect the secret, and the truth was closer than ever. Chapter 4. The web of alibis. The corridors of Cranford Asylum echoed with a hushed stillness, broken only by the distant creak of a floorboard or the soft murmur of a patient behind the locked door. Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings stood in the grand hall, the folded paper from Margaret Poole's diary now safely tucked into Poirot's pocket. The list of names and times, Dear Hargrove, Evelyn Marsh, Thomas Reed, burned in their minds, a silent accusation that demanded answers. The air felt heavy with secrets, as if the very walls of the asylum were complicit in the crime. Poirot's eyes gleamed with purpose as he turned to Lady Beatrice, who lingered nearby, her composure strained. Madam, we must speak with the staff and those closest to Margaret Poole. Their movements this morning, their connections to her, they will reveal much. Let us begin, I think, with Mademoiselle Marsh. Lady Beatrice nodded, though her expression betrayed a flicker of unease. Evelyn is in the nurse's station. I'll fetch her. She glided away, her black silk dress whispering against the marble floor. Miss Marple leaned toward Hastings, her voice low. Captain, you know Lady Beatrice from your aunt's acquaintance. Has she always been so guarded, or is this tragedy making her cautious? Hastings frowned, adjusting his cufflinks. She's always been a bit aloof, but never like this. There's something weighing on her, I wager. She wrote to me about irregularities at the asylum, but never elaborated. I thought it was financial trouble, but now, he trailed off, glancing toward the corridor where Lady Beatrice had disappeared. Poirot, overhearing, nodded. The irregularities, they are perhaps the key. Margaret Poole, she was not killed for no reason. She saw something, or knew something, that threatened someone's safety or their secrets. Evelyn Marsh appeared moments later, her nurse's uniform crisp despite the day's turmoil. Her face was pale, her dark eyes wary as she faced Poirot and Miss Marple. You wanted to see me? She asked, her voice steady but clipped. Oui, mademoiselle, Poirot said, his tone polite but probing. You were close to Margaret Poole, were you not? As head nurse, you must have worked with her daily. Evelyn nodded, her hands clasped tightly. She managed the household staff, ensured the asylum ran smoothly. We spoke often, but it was professional. She was private. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes gentle but sharp. And yet, my dear, you were seen in the garden at midnight 2 nights ago, according to Margaret's notes. An unusual time for a stroll, wouldn't you say? Evelyn's cheeks flushed, and her gaze darted to the floor. I couldn't sleep. The asylum can be stifling. I went for some air. There's no crime in that. No crime, perhaps, Poirot said, his mustache twitching, but curious timing. Tell me, what was your relationship with Margaret? Did she ever confide in you about anything troubling? Evelyn hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. She was quiet, but she noticed things. Sometimes she mentioned oddities, a patient's visitor who stayed too long, or a door left unlocked. But nothing specific. She didn't gossip. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And this morning, during the church service? Where were you when the scream was heard? In my pew, with Thomas, Evelyn said quickly. We were singing the hymn, Abide with Me. I didn't leave until the scream. Miss Marple noted the speed of her response, as if rehearsed. And Margaret, she said softly, did you see her arrive at the church? She was expected, I believe. Evelyn's lips parted, then closed. I assumed she was there. It was crowded. I didn't notice her specifically. Poirot exchanged a glance with Miss Marple, a silent agreement that Evelyn's answers were too careful. As she was dismissed, Thomas Reed was called next. The solicitor entered with a nervous energy, his tie slightly askew. This is a dreadful business, he said, before Poirot could speak. Margaret was a good woman. I can't imagine who'd do this. Nor can we, Monsieur Reed, Poirot said, his voice smooth. But imagination is not our method. Facts, they will guide us. You were in the church, yes. And Margaret's note places you in the asylum's library at 11 last night. What brought you there so late? Thomas's hand went to his tie, adjusting it reflexively. I was reviewing some legal documents for Lady Beatrice. The asylum's finances are complicated. I often work late. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her question was pointed. And Margaret? Did she ever assist you with these documents, or perhaps overhear something sensitive? Thomas blinked, caught off guard. She brought tea sometimes, tidied the library. She never pried. If she heard anything, she didn't mention it. The interviews continued, each suspect weaving a similar tale. They were in the church, they saw nothing, they knew nothing. Deirdre Hargrove reiterated his alibi, supported by Clara, though her eyes avoided Poirot's. Clara herself spoke in halting whispers, claiming she was too distraught to notice details. Lady Beatrice, questioned last, maintained her story of being absorbed in the sermon, unaware of Margaret's presence or absence. As the interviews concluded, Poirot led Miss Marple and Hastings to a quiet corner of the asylum's library, a cavernous room lined with dusty tomes and heavy drapes. The alibis, they are too perfect, Poirot said, his voice low. Everyone was in their pew, everyone heard the scream, everyone saw nothing. But someone was in the sacristy, and someone held the blade. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the details. The earring we found, Mr. Poirot, it bothers me. It's too delicate for Margaret, and none of the women admitted to losing one. Could it belong to a patient, perhaps? Someone not at the service? Poirot's eyes brightened. A patient, yes, or a visitor. The asylum, it is a closed world, but not impenetrable. We must see the patient records, the visitor logs. And the sacristy itself, we must return there. They made their way back to the church, where Constable Harris was overseeing the removal of Margaret's body. The sacristy, now cordoned off, felt colder, the bloodstains darker against the stone. Poirot knelt by the spot where the chalice had fallen, his fingers tracing the air above it. The chalice, it was moved after the murder. Why? To distract, to mislead. And the earring placed, or dropped in haste. Miss Marple's gaze fell on the narrow window, still latched. The window is too small for escape, but the latch is old. Could it have been tampered with? Hastings, ever practical, examined the latch. It's stiff, but intact. No signs of forced entry. Whoever did this was already inside the church. Poirot stood, his expression thoughtful. The church, the asylum, they are connected, not just by proximity, but by people. The murderer walked among the congregation, sat in the pews, perhaps even prayed. We must look closer at their alibis, their contradictions. As they left the sacristy, Miss Marple paused, her eyes catching a faint mark on the doorframe, a smudge, barely visible, like a fingerprint in wax. Mr. Poirot, she said quietly, this door was ajar during the service. Someone passed through it, and recently. Poirot's mustache twitched. A detail, mademoiselle, and a vital one. The door, the earring, the chalice, the diary, they are threads in a tapestry. We pull one, and the pattern will emerge. The church clock struck 4, its chimes a somber reminder of time slipping away. The killer was close, hidden in the alibis and half-truths. Miss Marple felt the familiar stir of anticipation, knowing that each question, each observation, brought them nearer to the truth. Chapter 5. The red herrings. The fading light of the October afternoon cast long shadows across the stone floor of St. Anselm's Church, where the congregation had been released from their enforced confinement, though under strict orders from Constable Harris not to leave the village. The air buzzed with suppressed tension, as if the very walls of St. Mary's Hollow held their breath, waiting for the next revelation. Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings stood in the asylum's library, surrounded by towering bookshelves that seemed to lean inward, guarding their secrets. The folded paper from Margaret Poole's diary lay on the table before them, its cryptic list of names and times a silent challenge. Poirot's green eyes gleamed as he tapped the paper with a manicured finger. This list, it is no mere record, Mes Amos. It is a window into the hidden movements of this place. Dacre Hargrove in the West Wing at 2 in the morning, Mademoiselle Marsh in the garden at midnight, Monsieur Reed in this very library at 11. These are not innocent wanderings. Margaret Poole, she was watching, and someone wished to stop her eyes. Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly in her hands, a habit that steadied her thoughts. Margaret was methodical, like a village gossip who keeps her observations to herself until they're needed. But this list suggests she saw something dangerous. Perhaps she confronted someone, or they feared she would. Hastings, pacing near a window, turned with a frown. But why kill her in the church? It's bold, almost reckless. The sacristy during a service, surely the murderer risked being seen. Precisement, Hastings, Poirot said, his voice sharp. The boldness, it is deliberate. The sacristy, it is a stage, a place to shock, to distract. The murderer wishes us to look in the wrong direction, to chase shadows. But Hercule Poirot does not chase shadows, he finds the light. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly. And yet, Mr. Poirot, shadows can be revealing. The earring, the chalice, the smudge on the doorframe, they are small things. But in a village like St. Mary Mead, I learned that small things often unravel great crimes. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Constable Harris, his young face etched with frustration. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, I have something to show you. One of the villagers found this near the church gate. He held out a small, blood-stained knife, its blade no longer than a letter opener but wickedly sharp. It was hidden in the ivy, just out of sight. Poirot took the knife, wrapped in Harris's handkerchief, and examined it with care. A surgical blade, perhaps, or a gentleman's pocket knife. The blood, it is fresh, and as sepia. This could be our weapon. Miss Marple leaned closer, her eyes narrowing. It's too convenient, Mr. Poirot. A knife left so near the church, where anyone might find it. It feels like a lure, meant to point us toward an obvious suspect. Hastings's brow furrowed. You think it's a red herring? But whose? And why? Poirot's mustache twitched. To answer that, we must return to the alibis and the lies. Let us summon Dacre Hargrove again. His profession, it gives him access to such blades, and his presence in the West Wing at 2 m is most curious. Dacre Hargrove was brought to the library, his stern demeanor now tinged with irritation. I've told you everything, he said, standing stiffly before them. I was in the church, with Clara, during the service. I know nothing of this knife. Poirot held up the blade, still wrapped in the handkerchief. And yet, doctor, this is a tool of precision, like those you might use in your work. And Margaret's notes place you in the West Wing, where the patients' rooms are, at an hour most unusual. What were you doing there? Hargrove's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. I was checking on a patient, Mrs. Langley. She's prone to night terrors and needed sedation. It's not uncommon for me to make late rounds. Miss Marple's needles paused. Mrs. Langley, you say? A frail woman, I believe, who rarely leaves her room. Did Margaret assist you that night? Hargrove hesitated, a flicker of unease crossing his face. She may have been in the corridor, bringing linens. I didn't speak to her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And yet, she noted your presence, Doctor. Why would she do that, unless it was significant? Hargrove's composure faltered, his hand brushing his watch chain. I don't know why she kept such notes. Perhaps she was suspicious by nature. But I had no reason to harm her. As Hargrove was dismissed, Miss Marple leaned toward Poirot. He's hiding something, Mr. Poirot. His answers are too careful, and that pause when I mention Margaret is as if he fears what she might have seen. Poirot nodded. We, mademoiselle. And so we must widen our net. Let us speak to the patients, or at least those capable of answering. Mrs. Langley, perhaps, or others in the West Wing. And we must see the visitor logs. Someone from outside may have entered the asylum. They moved to the nurse's station, where Evelyn Marsh provided the visitor records with reluctance. The log showed few entries, a solicitor visiting a patient the previous week, a delivery of medical supplies, and a single name that caught Miss Marple's eye, Clara Hargrove, listed as visiting Mrs. Langley 3 nights prior, at 10 p.m. Professor Hargrove. Hastings said, surprised. But she's the doctor's wife, not a visitor. Why would she be listed? Poirot's eyes gleamed. A question most excellent, Hastings. Perhaps Madame Hargrove was not visiting as a wife, but as something else. We must speak with her again. Clara was summoned, her pale face drawn as she entered the library. Her hands trembled as she sat, her eyes avoiding the knife on the table. I don't understand, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want from me? Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. Madam, the visitor log shows you entered the asylum at 10 p.m., 3 nights ago, to see Mrs. Langley. Why, when you lie here and could see her at any time? Clara's eyes widened, and she clutched her handkerchief. I was worried about her. She's been agitated, and I thought a familiar face might calm her. It was nothing unusual. Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost maternal. My dear, you seem so frightened. If there's something you know about Margaret, or about that night, you must tell us. It could save another life. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head. I can't, she whispered. I can't. As she fled the room, Poirot turned to Miss Marple. She is breaking, mademoiselle. The fear, it is eating her. But fear of what? Her husband. Another. Or perhaps herself. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm. Fear is a powerful motive, Mr. Poirot. And that knife is too perfect, too neatly placed. Someone wants us to suspect dear Hargrove, or perhaps Clara. But the truth lies elsewhere, I think, in the shadows of those late-night movements. The asylum's clock chimed 5, its somber toll echoing through the halls. The knife, the diary, the earring, the smudge, each clue pointed to a web of deception, with dear Hargrove at its center, or perhaps a pawn in a larger game. Poirot and Miss Marple exchanged a glance, their resolve unspoken but firm. The red herrings were multiplying, but the truth, like a hidden thread, was beginning to show. Chapter 6. The clue in detail. The twilight deepened over St. Mary's Hollow, casting Cranford Asylum in a veil of shadow that seemed to mirror the secrets it held. Inside the library, the air was thick with the scent of old books and the faint tang of wax polish, as Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings pored over the clues they had gathered. The blood-stained knife, now in Constable Harris's custody, lay heavy in their thoughts, its discovery too convenient to be trusted. Margaret Poole's diary, with its cryptic list of late-night movements, sat open on the table, a silent witness to her final observations. The pearl earring, wrapped in Poirot's handkerchief, rested beside it, its delicate craftsmanship a stark contrast to the brutality of the crime. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked rhythmically, a counterpoint to the ticking of the library's grandfather clock. Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, studied the diary's entries. Margaret was meticulous, she said softly. These notes, dear Hargrove at 2 a.m., Evelyn in the garden, Thomas in the library, they're not random. She was building a picture, perhaps of something she didn't fully understand until it was too late. Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled. Oui, mademoiselle. And the earring is a detail most intriguing. It does not belong to Margaret, nor to any of the women we have questioned. Yet it was in the sacristy, near her body. A mistake by the killer, or a deliberate misdirection. Hastings, leaning against a bookshelf, frowned. It's dashed odd, Poirot. If the earring was dropped by accident, the killer must be someone who wears such things, a woman, most likely. But if it was placed there, it's another red herring, like that knife. Precisely, Hastings, Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. The knife, it points to dear Hargrove, with his surgical precision. The earring, it suggests a woman's presence. But Hercule Poirot does not accept clues at face value. We must look closer at the smallest details, for they will unravel the truth. Miss Marple paused her knitting, her gaze distant. In my village, Captain Hastings, I once knew a woman who lost an earring much like this one. It was found in a place it shouldn't have been, and it led to the discovery of a theft. Small things, you see, can betray great secrets. I wonder if this earring belongs to someone we haven't yet considered, a patient, perhaps, or a visitor to the asylum. Poirot's mustache twitched. A patient, yes. The West Wing, where dear Hargrove was seen, houses the most delicate cases. Let us visit Mrs. Langley, the patient he claims to have been tending. Her night terrors, they may be more than a medical concern. With Lady Beatrice's reluctant permission, they made their way to the West Wing, a labyrinth of narrow corridors lit by flickering gas lamps. The air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and the faint moans of restless patients. Mrs. Langley's room was at the far end, its door marked with a brass plate. Evelyn Marsh, summoned to unlock it, hesitated before turning the key, her expression guarded. Inside, Mrs. Langley sat by a small window, her frail frame wrapped in a shawl. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, darted toward the visitors, and her hands clutched a worn Bible. Who's there? She whispered, her voice tremulous. Is it Margaret? She promised to bring my tea. Miss Marple's heart softened, but her mind remained sharp. No, Mrs. Langley, it's not Margaret. I'm Miss Marple, and this is Mr. Poirot and Captain Hastings. We're here to ask about Margaret. Did you see her recently? Mrs. Langley's gaze flickered, and she clutched her Bible tighter. Margaret was kind. She brought me tea, read to me sometimes. But she was worried. She said someone was watching her. Poirot leaned forward, his voice gentle but insistent. Watching her, madam. Phew. And when did she say this? Mrs. Langley's eyes clouded, as if memory slipped through her fingers. 2 nights ago, perhaps. She was here, late. She said she'd seen something in the West Wing, something wrong. She wouldn't tell me more. She was afraid. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Poirot. The diary's note about dear Hargrove in the West Wing at 2 a.m. on October 20th took on new weight. Did you see dear Hargrove at night, Mrs. Langley? She asked softly. The old woman's hands trembled. He came, yes. Gave me my medicine. But he was in a hurry, not like usual. And there was someone else in the corridor. I heard voices, low and angry. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Voices, madam. A man, a woman. What did they say? Mrs. Langley shook her head, her voice fading. I couldn't hear. Just whispers, then footsteps. Margaret laughed, and I slept. As Evelyn escorted them out, Miss Marple noted the nurse's tense posture, her hands clasped too tightly. Miss Marsh, she said gently, you were in the garden at midnight, 2 nights ago. Did you see anyone else? Perhaps Margaret, or someone following her? Evelyn's face paled, but she shook her head. I was alone. I told you I needed air. I didn't see Margaret. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And yet, mademoiselle, your name is in her diary. You were watched, as she was. If you know something, now is the time to speak. Evelyn's lips parted, but she said nothing, her eyes darting to the corridor as if expecting an eavesdropper. She hurried away, leaving the trio in the dim hallway. Back in the library, Poirot paced, his mind racing. The voices in the west wing, the earring, the diary, these are not separate threads, but part of one fabric. Mrs. Langley heard an argument, and Margaret recorded it. Someone in this asylum feared her knowledge. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly. And the earring, Mr. Poirot. I've been thinking about its clasped gold, finely made, but slightly bent, as if torn off in a struggle. It's possible it was dropped in the sacristy during the murder, but not by Margaret. Hastings, who had been quiet, spoke up. You mean the killer wore it? Or someone else was there? Perhaps both, Poirot said, his voice low. The sacristy door was ajar during the service. Someone entered, killed Margaret, and left quickly, but not without leaving traces. The earring, the chalice, the smudge on the doorframe, they are pieces of the puzzle, but we need one more detail to see the shape. As they prepared to return to the church, a young orderly approached, his face pale. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, I found something in the sacristy while cleaning. It was under the table, missed by the constable. He held out a small, crumpled piece of paper, stained with a faint red smear. Poirot unfolded it carefully, revealing a single line in Margaret's neat hand. Ch. West Wing, Landian, Hin Tujan letter. Clara Hargrove, Miss Marple murmured. The visitor log mentioned her, and now this. A letter, perhaps one she didn't want seen. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A letter, a confrontation, a murder. The pieces, they begin to fit. We must find this letter, and we must press Madame Hargrove. Her fear, it is the key. The asylum's clock struck 6, its chimes a somber reminder of the passing hours. The clue, small but vital, had shifted the investigation. Margaret Poole's death was no random act, it was a desperate strike to silence a woman who knew too much. And in the shadows of Cranford Asylum, the truth was drawing closer. Chapter 7. More lies surfaced. The evening settled over street, Mary's hollow like a heavy cloak, the sky bruising purple as the lights of Cranford Asylum glowed faintly against the encroaching dark. In the library, Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings huddled over the latest clue, the crumpled note found in the sacristy, its cryptic message Ch. West Wing, Landian, 1022 letter pointing directly to Clara Hargrove. The air was thick with the weight of discovery, each new detail tightening the web of suspicion around the inhabitants of the asylum. Miss Marple's knitting needles lay still in her lap, her eyes distant but sharp. Clara Hargrove, she murmured, so nervous, so fragile. That note suggests Margaret saw her with a letter, something secret, something worth killing for. In my village, I once knew a young woman who hid a letter that changed everything. It was her undoing, poor thing. Poirot, pacing before the fireplace, nodded. Oui, mademoiselle. The letter, it is the heart of this matter. Clara's fear, it is not merely grief, it is the fear of exposure. We must find this letter, and we must confront her, but with care. She is close to breaking. Hastings, standing by the window, turned with a frown. But why would Clara be in the West Wing at that hour? She's not staff, not a nurse. And the letter, what could it contain to drive someone to murder? Poirot's mustache twitched. That, mon ami, is what we shall discover. The West Wing, it is where secrets are kept, patients, records, private meetings. Margaret Poole, she was the silent observer, and her nose suggests she saw too much. Let us return to the asylum's records, and then we shall speak with Madame Hargrove. They moved to the nurse's station, where Evelyn Marsh, still pale and guarded, provided access to the patient and staff records. The files were meticulously organized, but Poirot's keen eyes scanned for irregularities. Among the papers, he found a log of correspondence, noting a letter received by Mrs. Langley 3 days prior, addressed from an anonymous sender in London. The log described it as sealed, urgent, and noted that Clara Hargrove had collected it on Mrs. Langley's behalf. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Mrs. Langley, a patient with night terrors, receiving urgent letters? And Clara, not her husband, collecting it? That's most irregular, Mr. Poirot. Indeed, Poirot said, his voice low. And Margaret, she knew of this letter. Her note confirms it. We must see Mrs. Langley again, and then Clara. The truth, it is close. They returned to Mrs. Langley's room in the west wing, the corridor now dimly lit by gas lamps that flickered like uneasy spirits. The old woman sat as before, her Bible clutched tightly, her eyes darting toward the door. You're back, she whispered, her voice trembling. Is it about Margaret? She didn't come today. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. Madam, we need to know about the letter you received 3 days ago. The one Madame Hargrove collected for you. What was it about? Mrs. Langley's hands shook, and her gaze grew distant. A letter. Oh, yes. Clara brought it. She said it was from my nephew, but I never read it. She took it away, said it would upset me. Margaret was there, in the corridor. She looked worried. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft as a lullaby. Did Margaret say anything about the letter, my dear? Anything at all? Mistress Langley's eyes clouded. She asked Clara why she took it. Clara was cross, said it was none of her business. They argued, quietly, but I heard. Margaret said, you can't hide it forever. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And then, madam? What happened? Mistress Langley shook her head. They left. I slept. The medicine makes me sleep. As they left the room, Evelyn Marsh lingered nearby, her expression unreadable. Poirot turned to her sharply. Mademoiselle, you were in the West Wing often. Did you see this argument between Margaret and Clara? Evelyn's lips tightened. I don't eavesdrop, Mr. Poirot. I was busy with my duties. If they argued, I didn't hear it. Miss Marple noted the nurse's defensive tone, the way her hands clenched at her sides. Thank you, my dear, she said gently. You've been most helpful. With Evelyn dismissed, the trio convened in the corridor. Clara Hargrove, Poirot said, his voice low, she is at the center of this. The letter, the argument, her fear, it all points to her. But is she the killer, or another victim of circumstance? They found Clara in the asylum's drawing room, seated alone by a fire that did little to warm the chill in her demeanor. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, and her hands twisted a lace handkerchief into knots. Mrs. Hargrove, Poirot began, his tone deceptively mild. We have learned of a letter, collected by you from Mrs. Langley. Margaret Poole knew of it, and she argued with you. What was in that letter, and why did it cause such tension? Clara's breath caught, and she rose, her hands trembling. I don't know what you mean. It was just a letter from her nephew, nothing important. I took it to spare her distress. Miss Marple's eyes were kind but unrelenting. My dear, Margaret wrote of this letter in her notes, and she argued with you about it. She said you couldn't hide it forever. What was she hiding, and from whom? Clara's composure cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. It wasn't my secret, she cried, her voice breaking. It was Ernest's, dear Hargrove. The letter was from a colleague in London, warning him about discrepancies in the asylum's accounts. I took it to protect him. Margaret saw me, and she wouldn't let it go. She said she'd tell Lady Beatrice if I didn't explain. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And did you explain, madam? Or did you silence her? Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. No. I didn't kill her. I begged her to stay quiet, but she said it was her duty to report it. I left her in the corridor that night. I swear, I didn't see her again until the church. Hastings, standing by the door, looked skeptical. But you were in the church, Mrs. Hargrove. You could have slipped into the sacristy. That knife is the sword your husband might use. Clara shook her head frantically. I was with Ernest the whole time. I didn't leave the pew. You have to believe me. Poirot's gaze was steady. We believe what the facts tell us, madam. And the facts, they say you had motive, opportunity, and a secret worth killing for. As Clara collapsed into sobs, Miss Marple touched her arm gently. There, my dear. The truth will come out, and it's better it does. If you know anything more, now is the time. But Clara only wept, her words incoherent. The trio left her, the weight of her confession settling over them. In the corridor, Poirot spoke softly. The letter, it points to dear Hargrove's secrets, financial, perhaps, or something darker. But Clara, she is not the killer, I think. Her fear is genuine, but it is fear of another. Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. The letter is the key, Mr. Poirot. If we find it, we find the motive. And I suspect it's still here, in the asylum, hidden where Margaret's eyes could not follow. The clock struck 7, its chimes echoing through the silent halls. The lies were surfacing, each one a crack in the facade of Cranford Asylum. But the truth, like the letter, remained just out of reach, waiting for the next clue to bring it to light. Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The night had fully descended upon St. Mary's Hollow, wrapping Cranford Asylum in a shroud of darkness pierced only by the flickering gas lamps along its corridors. The library, where Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings had reconvened, felt like a fortress against the secrets that pressed in from all sides. Clara Hargrove's tearful confession about the letter and her husband's financial discrepancies had left a palpable tension in the air. The crumpled note from Margaret Poole's diary, the blood-stained knife, and the mysterious pearl earring lay on the table, silent witnesses to a crime that grew more complex with each revelation. Miss Marple's knitting needles were still, her hands resting in her lap as she gazed at the fire. Clara's fear is real, she said softly, but it's not just for herself. She's protecting someone, her husband, perhaps, or something deeper. In my village, I once knew a woman who wept like that, hiding her son's misdeeds. It broke her heart, but she never spoke until the truth forced her hand. Poirot, standing by the table, nodded, his eyes fixed on the note. Oui, mademoiselle. Clara's tears, they are not those of a murderer, but of one who knows too much and fears the consequences. The letter she mentioned, it is the key. It holds the secret that drove someone to kill Margaret Poole. We must find it, and we must press further. Hastings, pacing restlessly, stopped and turned. But where do we look, Poirot? The asylum is a maze, and Clara's not likely to tell us more. That letter could be anywhere, burned, hidden, or still in someone's possession. Poirot's mustache twitched. Not burned, mon ami. A letter worth killing for is a letter worth keeping, if only to ensure its silence. We must search dear Hargrove's office, his quarters, and perhaps the West Wing again. The letter, it is close, I feel it. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the library door. Lady Beatrice entered, her face pale but composed, her black silk dress catching the firelight. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, Captain Hastings, she said, her voice steady but strained, I've just spoken with Clara. She's in a dreadful stage, poor thing. I fear this tragedy is unraveling us all. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her gaze was piercing. Lady Beatrice, you've been most kind to allow us access to the asylum. But tell me, did Margaret ever speak to you about a letter, or about dear Hargrove's affairs? Lady Beatrice hesitated, her fingers tightening on her jet bracelet. She mentioned nothing specific, but she was troubled these last few weeks. She said once that she felt watched, as if someone didn't trust her. I thought it was the strain of her duties, but now her voice faltered, and she looked away. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Madam, you wrote to Captain Hastings of irregularities at the asylum. Were these financial, as Clara suggests, or something more? Lady Beatrice's composure wavered, and for the first time, a crack appeared in her aristocratic facade. I suspected discrepancies in the accounts. Deeper Hargrove manages the asylum's finances, and some expenses didn't add up: medications, supplies, even patient fees. I asked Margaret to keep an eye on things, discreetly. She was loyal, but perhaps too diligent. Miss Marple's breath caught. You asked her to watch dear Hargrove? And she reported back to you? Lady Beatrice nodded, her eyes glistening. She came to me 3 days ago, said she found something, a letter, addressed to Mrs. Langley but meant for dear Hargrove. She didn't read it, but she saw Clara take it. She thought it was suspicious. I told her to leave it be, that I'd handle it. But now she's dead, and her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. Hastings, visibly moved, stepped forward. Lady Beatrice, you couldn't have known. But if Margaret was killed because of that letter, we need to find it. Did she say where it was? Lady Beatrice shook her head, her hands trembling. She only said Clara had it. I should have acted sooner. I thought I could protect her, protect the asylum. But I'll fail her. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. Madam, you have not failed yet. Help us now. Allow us to search dear Hargrove's office and quarters. The letter, it is the key to this murder. Lady Beatrice nodded, wiping her eyes. Very well. His office is in the east wing, his quarters nearby. I'll give you the keys. The trio moved swiftly to dear Hargrove's office, a small, orderly room lined with medical texts and ledgers. The desk was locked, but Lady Beatrice's key opened it, revealing a stack of papers, patient files, and a ledger marked asylum accounts. Poirot's nimble fingers flipped through the ledger, his eyes scanning for irregularities. Here, he said, pausing at a page. Payments for medications, dated last month, but the quantities are excessive, far more than the patients require. And the supplier, a firm in London, is unfamiliar. Miss Marple peered over his shoulder. Fraud, perhaps? Or something worse, like selling medications on the black market. Margaret might have stumbled onto this, and the letter could confirm it. Hastings, searching the drawers, pulled out a small, locked box. This was hidden behind some books. Its heavy could be important. Poirot took the box, examining its brass lock. We need a key, or a locksmith. But first, let us see Clara again. Her tears, they tell us she knows more than she admits. They found Clara in her quarters, a modest room adjacent to dear Hargrove's. She sat by a window, her face streaked with tears, her hands clutching a crumpled letter. When she saw them, she gasped, shoving the letter into her pocket. Please, leave me alone, she whispered. I've told you everything. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Not everything, madam. That letter in your pocket, may we see it? Clara's hands trembled, and she shook her head. It's nothing. Just a personal note. It has nothing to do with Margaret. Miss Marple's voice was soft, almost maternal. My dear, you're carrying a terrible burden. If that letter is what Margaret died for, you must let us help you. Keeping it hidden only puts you in danger. Clara's resolve crumbled, and she burst into sobs, pulling the letter from her pocket and thrusting it toward Poirot. Take it. I can't bear it anymore. It's from a colleague of Ernest's, warning him that his dealings were discovered. Margaret saw me take it, and she wouldn't let it go. I begged her, but she said she had to tell Lady Beatrice. I didn't kill her, I swear. Poirot unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the contents. It was brief but damning, a warning from a London physician, accusing dear Hargrove of diverting asylum funds and selling surplus medications illicitly. This, Poirot said, is motive enough for murder. But is it yours, madam, or your husband's? Clara's sobs grew louder. I don't know. Ernest didn't tell me everything, but I knew he was worried. He said we'd lose everything if the truth came out. I took the letter to protect him, but I didn't hurt Margaret. As Hastings comforted Clara, Miss Marple turned to Poirot. The letter confirms dear Hargrove's motive, but Clara's anguish feels genuine. Someone else may have acted to protect him or to protect themselves. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. The web tightens, mademoiselle. The letter, the knife, the earring, they point to dear Hargrove, but the truth is more complex. We must confront him, and soon. The asylum's clock struck 8, its chimes a mournful echo in the silent halls. Clara's confession had cracked open the case, revealing the motive rooted in greed and desperation. But the killer's identity remained elusive, hidden behind the lies that were now surfacing like ghosts in the night. Chapter 9. The trap air in Cranford Asylum grew colder as the night deepened, the gas lamps casting long, wavering shadows across the polished marble of the grand hall. Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings stood in the library, the damning letter from Clara Hargrove now safely in Poirot's pocket. Its contents accusations of dear Hargrove's financial misconduct and illicit dealings had tightened the noose of suspicion around the stern physician. Yet the puzzle remained incomplete, the killer's identity still cloaked in the web of lies and half-truths that enveloped Street. Mary's hollow, Miss Marple's knitting lay untouched, her eyes sharp as she considered the clues. The letter is a motive, Mr. Poirot, she said softly, but it's too neat, too perfectly placed in Clara's hands. In my village, I once knew a man who left a forged note to shift blame. I wonder if someone here is playing a similar game. Poirot's mustache twitched, his green eyes gleaming with agreement. Precisement, mademoiselle. The letter points to dear Hargrove, but it was Clara who held it, and Clara who broke under our questions. The murderer, they wish us to look at the doctor, or perhaps at his wife. But Hercule Poirot does not follow the path laid out by others. We must set a trap, to draw the true culprit into the open. Hastings, leaning against the fireplace, looked puzzled. A trap, Poirot? What do you mean? Gather everyone and accuse them, like you've done before. Poirot's smile was faint but sly. Not quite, mon ami. The trap, it must be subtle, psychological. We shall let it be known that we have found the letter and that it contains a clue to the killer's identity. The guilty one, they will act, either to retrieve it or to silence us. And when they move, we shall be watching. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning over the possibilities. A dangerous game, Mr. Poirot, but effective. In Street Mary Mead, I once caught a thief by letting it slip that a witness had seen him. He panicked, and his actions betrayed him. They devised their plan with care. Poirot would inform Lady Beatrice, dear Hargrove, Evelyn Marsh, and Thomas Reed that the letter had been found and would be presented to Constable Harris the following morning. He would hint that it contained a detail known only to the killer that would unravel the case. Miss Marple and Hastings would watch the suspects, noting their reactions, their movements, their whispers. The asylum, with its maze of corridors and locked rooms, would be their stage. Poirot began by summoning the key suspects to the grand hall, where Lady Beatrice had agreed to gather them. The fire crackled in the massive hearth, casting flickering light on the tense faces of dear Hargrove, Clara, Evelyn, and Thomas. Lady Beatrice stood apart, her expression guarded but curious. Constable Harris, hovering near the door, watched with a mixture of skepticism and deference to Poirot's reputation. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice clear and commanding. We have made a discovery most significant. The letter, taken by Madame Hargrove and known to Margaret Poole, is in our possession. It contains not only evidence of financial misconduct, but a clue, a detail so precise that it points directly to the murderer of poor Margaret. Tomorrow, this letter will be given to the authorities, and the truth will be revealed. A ripple of unease passed through the group. Dear Hargrove's face darkened, his hand brushing his watch chain. Clara's eyes widened, her hands twisting her handkerchief into knots. Evelyn Marsh stood rigid, her lips pressed tightly together, while Thomas Reed adjusted his tie with a nervous jerk. Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened on her jet bracelet, her gaze flickering toward the doctor. Miss Marple, seated near the back, observed each reaction with her quiet intensity. "They're all afraid," she murmured to Hastings, "but for different reasons." Deeper Hargrove's anger, Clara's panic, Evelyn's silence, Thomas's nerves. Someone is hiding more than fear. Poirot continued, his tone measured but pointed. "The killer, they are among us, and they know the letter's secret. Tonight, we shall rest, but tomorrow, the truth will shine like the sun. Bonsoir." As the group dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the hall, Poirot turned to Miss Marple and Hastings. "Now, Ms. Amos, we watch. The guilty one, they will not sleep tonight. They will act to destroy the letter, to confront another, or perhaps to flee. We must be vigilant." The trio split their duties. Hastings took the east wing, near Dr. Hargrove's office and quarters, where the letter might be sought. Miss Marple stationed herself near the nurse's station, where Evelyn Marsh's movements could be observed. Poirot patrolled the west wing, close to the patients' rooms and the scene of Margaret's late-night observations. They agreed to meet at midnight, or sooner if something occurred. The hours crept by, the asylum's silence broken only by the creak of floorboards and the distant ticking of clocks. Miss Marple, seated in a shadowed alcove, her knitting a pretense for her watchfulness, saw Evelyn emerge from the nurse's station at 10:30. The young woman glanced around, then moved swiftly toward the west wing, her steps purposeful. Miss Marple followed at a discreet distance, her soft shoes silent on the marble floor. Evelyn paused at a locked door marked Records Room, producing a key from her pocket. She slipped inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Miss Marple crept closer, peering through the gap. Evelyn was rifling through a filing cabinet, her hands trembling as she searched. Suddenly, a shadow moved behind her figure, tall and cloaked in the dim light. Evelyn gasped, spinning around, but the figure seized her arm, whispering urgently. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but she remained still, straining to hear. The words were muffled, but she caught fragments. "The letter, you know, can't let them find it." Evelyn's voice, sharp with fear, replied, "I didn't tell them anything. It wasn't me." Before Miss Marple could act, footsteps echoed from the corridor. Hastings, hurrying toward her. The figure in the records room froze, then fled through a side door, leaving Evelyn trembling. Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Miss Marsh, what were you searching for? And who was that with you?" Evelyn's face crumpled, her hands covering her mouth. I can't see. They'll kill me, like they killed Margaret. Please, Miss Marple, don't tell anyone." Hastings, arriving breathless, looked between them. "What's happened?" "I saw someone running toward the west wing." "Was it Dr. Hargrove?" Miss Marple shook her head. "I couldn't see clearly, but the voice was low, possibly a man's." "We must find Mr. Poirot." They hurried to the west wing, where Poirot was waiting near Mrs. Langley's room. His eyes gleamed as they recounted the incident. "A confrontation in the records room," he said, "and a figure who flees. The trap, it has sprung, Ms. Amos. The killer is nervous, and they are close. We must search the records room now, before the evidence is lost." The clock struck 11, its chimes a stark reminder of the narrowing window. The trap had been set, and the killer had moved, but the truth remained just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of Cranford Asylum. Chapter 10. The reveal. The corridors of Cranford Asylum were shrouded in silence, broken only by the soft tread of Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings as they hurried toward the records room. The encounter. Miss Marple had witnessed Evelyn Marsh's frantic search, and the mysterious figure who confronted her had set their trap in motion. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the walls themselves knew the moment of truth was near. The letter, the earring, the knife, and Margaret Poole's cryptic diary notes had woven a complex tapestry, and now, in the dim glow of the gas lamps, the threads were about to be unraveled, Poirot's eyes gleamed as he pushed open the records room door, revealing a small, cluttered space lined with filing cabinets and shelves of dusty ledgers. Evelyn Marsh had fled moments before, leaving a drawer half open, papers spilling onto the floor. She was searching for something, Poirot said, his voice low but intense. Perhaps the letter, or something else that could betray the killer. We must examine this room carefully. Miss Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, scanned the room with her sharp eyes. Evelyn was frightened, Mr. Poirot, but not just at being caught. That figure, she knew them, and they threatened her. I heard enough to know they spoke of a letter and its secrets. Hastings, ever practical, began sorting through the scattered papers. If the letter's here, we'll find it. But what if the killer already took it? That figure ran off awfully fast. Poirot's mustache twitched. They ran, yes, but not far. The asylum, it is a closed circle, like the church. The killer is among us, and they are desperate. Let us see what Mademoiselle Marsh left behind. As they searched, Miss Marble's gaze fell on a small, locked box tucked behind a stack of ledgers. It was similar to the one found in Dear Hargrove's office, but older, its brass tarnished. Mr. Poirot, she said softly, this box is out of place in a records room. Could it hold what Evelyn was seeking? Poirot examined the box, his fingers tracing the lock. The key, we need a key. But first, let us summon the suspects. The trap, it has worked, but now we must gather them all and reveal the truth. The killer, they will betray themselves under pressure. With Lady Beatrice's assistance, the key suspects were assembled in the asylum's grand hall. Dear Hargrove, his face stern but pale. Clara, trembling and clutching her handkerchief. Evelyn Marsh, her eyes red and evasive. Thomas Reed, adjusting his tie nervously. And Lady Beatrice herself, her composure fraying at the edges. Constable Harris stood by the door, his notebook ready, while the fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across the room. Poirot stood at the center, his small figure commanding the space. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice clear and resonant. The murder of Margaret Poole was a crime of desperation, committed to protect a secret. Tonight, we shall reveal the truth, step by step, using the little gray cells and the facts before us. He held up the letter, its creased paper catching the firelight. This letter, found in Madame Hargrove's possession, accuses Dear Hargrove of financial misconduct, diverting funds, selling medications illicitly. Margaret Poole knew of it, and she argued with Clara about it. But is this the motive for her death? Dear Hargrove's jaw tightened. I told you, I had nothing to do with her death. Yes, there were discrepancies, but I was investigating them myself. Margaret was loyal, she wouldn't have betrayed me. Clara's voice broke in. It's true. I took the letter to protect Ernest, but I didn't kill her. I begged her to stay quiet, but she wouldn't listen. Poirot's eyes moved to Evelyn. And you, Mademoiselle Marsh? You were seen in the records room tonight, searching frantically. Were you looking for this letter, or something else? And who was the figure who threatened you? Evelyn's face paled, her hands clenching. I was looking for patient records, to protect the asylum. That person. I didn't see who it was. They told me to stop asking questions, or I end up like Margaret. Miss Marple, seated quietly, spoke up, her voice gentle but piercing. My dear, you're protecting someone, just as Clara is. In my village, I've seen fear like yours. It comes from loyalty or love. Were you protecting Thomas, perhaps? Thomas Reed flinched, his hand frozen on his tie. Me? That's absurd. I was in the church, with Evelyn. I had no reason to harm Margaret. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And yet, Monsieur Reed, Margaret's diary places you in the library at 11 p.m., 2 nights before her death. What were you doing there, so late, with legal documents for an asylum in financial distress? Thomas stammered, his face reddening. I was reviewing contracts, as I said. Lady Beatrice asked me to ensure everything was in order. Lady Beatrice's eyes widened. I asked for a review, yes, but not at such an hour. Margaret mentioned you were there often, Thomas, and she found it odd. Poirot stepped forward, holding up the pearl earring. And this, found in the sacristy, near Margaret's body. It does not belong to her, nor to Clara, nor to Evelyn. But it is familiar, is it not, Lady Beatrice? Lady Beatrice's hand flew to her ear, her face draining of color. I lost an earring last week. I thought it was in my room. It can't be. Poirot's voice was sharp. It can, madam, and it is. The earring was dropped in the sacristy during the murder. And now, let us consider the timeline. Margaret was alive at 10 a.m., preparing tea at the asylum. She was dead by noon, in the sacristy, her throat cut with a blade we found near the church gate, a blade too conveniently placed. He turned to the group, his eyes scanning each face. The killer was in the church, among the congregation. They slipped into the sacristy, killed Margaret, and left the earring and knife to mislead us. But one detail betrays them: the smudge on the sacristy doorframe, a fingerprint in wax, left by someone wearing gloves. And only one person here is known to wear gloves during the service. All eyes turned to Lady Beatrice, whose Chapter 11. The reflection. The grand hall of Cranford Asylum was silent save for the soft crackle of the fire, its dying embers casting a faint glow over the room where the truth had finally been laid bare. Lady Beatrice Cranford, her aristocratic facade shattered, had been led away by Constable Harris, her confession still echoing in the minds of those who remained. Dick Ernest Hargrove stood rigid, his arm around the sobbing Clara, while Evelyn Marsh and Thomas Reed sat apart, their faces pale with the weight of their own complicity. Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings lingered near the hearth. The air heavy with the aftermath of the reveal. Miss Marple's knitting needles resumed their gentle rhythm, a soothing counterpoint to the tension that had gripped the asylum for hours. Her eyes, though soft with compassion, were as sharp as ever, reflecting on the human frailties that had led to such a tragedy. In my village of Street, Mary Mead, she said quietly, I've seen how pride and greed can twist even the most respectable hearts. Lady Beatrice loved this asylum, but her fear of losing her status drove her to a terrible act. Poirot, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, nodded solemnly. We, mademoiselle. The human heart, it is a complex thing, capable of great good and great evil. Lady Beatrice sought to protect her legacy, but in doing so, she destroyed it. The little grey cells, they see the truth, but they cannot undo the pain. Hastings, leaning against the mantelpiece, shook his head, his voice tinged with disbelief. It's hard to fathom, Poirot. She seemed so composed, so above it all. And Thomas Reed helping her forge that letter to throw us off. I thought he was just a nervous solicitor. Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile touching his lips. Mon ami, the nervous ones, they are often the most dangerous. Monsieur Reed, he was not the killer, but his loyalty to Lady Beatrice made him complicit. He forged the letter to protect her scheme, hoping to shift blame to dear Hargrove. But the earring, the wax smudge, the diary, they betrayed the truth. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze distant. And poor Margaret Poole, so diligent, so loyal. She saw too much, and her sense of duty cost her life. In my experience, it's often the quiet ones, the ones who watch and listen, who uncover the secrets others wish to hide. Poirot turned to her, his green eyes gleaming with respect. You are correct, Mademoiselle Marple. Your insight into human nature, it is as precise as my method of logic. Together, we have unraveled this tapestry of deceit, thread by thread. The trio stepped out into the grand hall, where the gas lamps flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the marble floor. The asylum, once a place of healing, now felt like a mausoleum, its secrets exposed but its wounds still raw. Dacre Hargrove approached, his face drawn but resolute. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, Captain Hastings, he said, his voice low, I owe you my thanks. Clara and I, we were caught in a web not of our making. I knew of the financial discrepancies, but I was trying to resolve them quietly. I never imagined it would lead to this. Clara, clinging to his arm, nodded through her tears. Margaret was kind to me. I should have told her to stop, to leave it alone. If I had, she might still be alive. Miss Marple's voice was gentle, almost maternal. My dear, you couldn't have known. Secrets have a way of spiraling beyond our control. You did what you thought was right, protecting your husband. Poirot's expression softened, though his tone remained firm. Madam, the truth, it is a harsh light, but it cleanses. The asylum will survive this, and you and dear Hargrove, you must rebuild with honesty. As the Hargroves retreated, Evelyn Marsh approached, her face pale but composed. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything, she said, her voice trembling. I knew Thomas was meeting Lady Beatrice, but I thought it was just business. When I saw Margaret's notes, I was afraid for him, for me. I didn't want to believe they could do this. Poirot's gaze was steady. Mademoiselle, fear clouds the judgment, but courage brings clarity. You must learn from this, and ensure the asylum's patients are never again caught in such schemes. Evelyn nodded, her eyes glistening, and left to resume her duties. Thomas Reed, still seated, avoided their gaze, his future uncertain as Constable Harris prepared to question him further about his role in the forgery. The clock struck 1, its chimes a solemn farewell to the night's revelations. Poirot turned to Miss Marple and Hastings, his expression reflective. The case, it is solved, but the heart, it feels no triumph. A life was taken, a trust betrayed. Yet the order, it is restored, and that is the task of Hercule Poirot. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes warm. And of Jane Marple, Mr. Poirot. We do not solve mysteries for glory, but to set things right, however small the village or grand the hall. Hastings, ever the optimist, clapped Poirot on the shoulder. Well, you've done it again, old chap. And Miss Marple, you're a marvel. I say, shall we have a cup of tea before we leave this gloomy place? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Tea, Hastings. None, a tisane, perhaps, to soothe the nerves. But first, we must take our leave of Street, Mary's Hollow. The village, it will heal, but it will not forget. As they stepped out into the cold night air, the spire of Street Anselm's church loomed against the starry sky, a silent sentinel over the village. Miss Marple glanced back at the asylum, its windows glowing faintly. The heart of a village is its people, she said softly, and their secrets, they linger long after the truth is told. Poirot nodded, his head tilted precisely. And the mind, mademoiselle, it seeks the truth, no matter where it hides. Au revoir, see Mary's Hollow. With that, the trio walked into the night, leaving behind a village forever changed by the sacred church slaughter in the relentless pursuit of truth. Chapter 12. The lingering shadows. The dawn broke over Street Mary's Hollow with a hesitant light, as if the sun itself were reluctant to illuminate the village after the dark events of the previous day. The spire of Street Anselm's church stood stark against the pale sky, its gargoyles seeming to watch over a community still reeling from the revelation of Lady Beatrice Cranford's guilt. Cranford Asylum, its grey stone walls looming at the edge of the village, felt quieter now, as if the confession had drained it of its secrets, leaving only echoes of sorrow. Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings had spent the night at the village inn, the Hollow Oak, their minds too restless for immediate departure. They gathered in the inn's small parlor, where a modest breakfast of tea, toast, and marmalade awaited. Miss Marple's knitting lay in her lap, her needles still as she gazed out the window at the mist curling over the fields. The village will recover, she said softly, but it will carry this scar for years. In Street Mary Mead, such tragedies linger in whispers, passed from one generation to the next. Poirot, sipping a tisane with his usual precision, nodded. Oui, mademoiselle. The order, it is restored, but the heart of a village, it does not forget so easily. Lady Beatrice's crime, it was born of pride and desperation, but its ripples touch all who live here. Hastings, buttering his toast, looked thoughtful. I still can't quite believe it, Poirot. Lady Beatrice, of all people. And Thomas Reed, helping her with that forged letter. It's a dashed ugly business. What happens to the asylum now? Poirot's eyes gleamed, though his expression was somber. The asylum, it will continue, I think, under new management. Dacre Hargrove, he is not without fault, but he is not a murderer. With Clara's support, and perhaps Miss Marsh's diligence, they may rebuild trust. But the shadow of Margaret Poole's death, it will linger. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. And Thomas Reed, Mr. Poirot? He was complicit, but not the killer. His loyalty to Lady Beatrice blinded him, but I wonder if there's more he hasn't told us. In my experience, those who forge documents often have their own secrets. Poirot's mustache twitched. A point most astute, mademoiselle. Monsieur Reed, he is to be questioned further by Constable Harris today. His role in the forgery, it is a crime, though lesser than murder. But I suspect his motives were not only loyalty to Lady Beatrice. Perhaps a financial stake in the asylum's sale, or a personal debt to her. We shall see. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the parlor door. Constable Harris entered, his young face weary but resolute. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, Captain Hastings, he said, removing his cap, I thought you'd want to know. Lady Beatrice made a full confession last night. She admitted to luring Margaret to the sacristy, saying she needed to discuss an urgent matter about the asylum. She used a knife from Dr. Hargrove's office, planning to frame him. The earring was a mistake. She didn't realize it had fallen until you pointed it out. Miss Marple nodded, her expression somber. Poor woman. Her pride was her undoing, but I can't help feeling a touch of pity. She thought she could control the truth, but it slipped through her fingers like sand. Poirot's tone was firm. Pity, yes, but justice must prevail. Margaret Poole was a woman of duty, and her death demanded an answer. The little grey cells, they have provided it. Harris hesitated, then added, there's more. Thomas Reed confessed to forging the letter, but he claims it was Lady Beatrice's idea. He says he was in love with her, and she promised him a share of the profits from selling the asylum's land. He's cooperating now, hoping for leniency. Hastings shook his head, his voice tinged with disgust. Love and greed, what a rotten combination. Poor Margaret got caught in the middle. Miss Marple's needles resumed their gentle clicking. In my village, I've seen love lead to many a foolish act. Thomas thought he was protecting Lady Beatrice, but he was protecting a lie. And now he must face the consequences. Poirot set down his tisane, his eyes reflective. The consequences, they are the price of truth. But there is one detail that troubles me still, the smudge on the sacristy doorframe, the wax. It confirms Lady Beatrice's gloves, but I wonder, was there another in the sacristy, watching, perhaps, or assisting? Miss Marple's eyes widened slightly. You suspect a second person, Mr. Poirot? Someone who knew but didn't act. Poirot's smile was faint. A possibility, mademoiselle. The asylum is a place of secrets, and not all have been revealed. But for now, the killer is caught, and the case, it is closed. Harris cleared his throat. There's one more thing. Evelyn Marsh came to me this morning. She admitted to seeing Thomas and Lady Beatrice in the library late at night, more than once. She didn't tell us because she was afraid of Thomas, and she felt guilty for not warning Margaret. She's offered to help dear Hargrove keep the asylum running, to make amends. Miss Marple's expression softened. Evelyn is young, but she has a good heart. She'll learn from this, and perhaps the asylum will be better for it. The clock in the parlor struck 9. Its chimes a gentle reminder of the world moving forward. Poirot rose, adjusting his hat with precision. Miss Amos, it is time for us to leave Street, Mary's Hollow. The village, it will heal, but it needs time. And we have done our part. Hastings grinned, gathering his coat. A job well done, I'd say. Though I could do with a proper cup of tea after all this. Miss Marple smiled, tucking her knitting into her bag. Tea is a great comfort, Captain, but so is knowing the truth has been served. Margaret Poole came west now. As they stepped out of the inn, the village was stirring, its people moving quietly about their tasks. The church spire stood tall, a symbol of both sanctity and tragedy. Poirot paused, his gaze lingering on the asylum in the distance. The human heart, it is a mystery even the little grey cells cannot fully solve. But we do what we can, n'est-ce pas? Miss Marple nodded, her eyes warm but wise. We do, Mr. Poirot. And sometimes, that's enough. With a final glance at St. Mary's Hollow, the trio walked toward the station, leaving behind a village forever changed by the sacred church slaughter, but one step closer to healing through the light of truth. Chapter 13. The unseen threads. The morning mist clung to the fields of St. Mary's Hollow, softening the edges of the village as Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings prepared to depart. The Hollow Oak, the village inn where they had spent the night, buzzed with quiet activity as villagers whispered about the arrest of Lady Beatrice Cranford and the shocking truth of Margaret Poole's murder. The trio sat in the inn's parlor, their luggage packed, but a lingering unease hung over them, as if the case, though solved, had left threads yet to be tied. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, her hands moving with the rhythm of habit as her mind sifted through the details. It's a curious thing, Mr. Poirot, she said, her voice low, how a single act of violence can unravel so many lives. Lady Beatrice's confession explains much, but I can't help feeling we missed something, a small detail, perhaps, that might tell us more about the shadows in this village. Poirot, adjusting his gloves with meticulous care, nodded. Mademoiselle Marple, your instincts, they are formidable. The case, it is closed, yet the little grey cells, they murmur of something unresolved. The wax smudge on the sacristy door, the earring, the letter all point to Lady Beatrice, but the presence of another, perhaps watching, perhaps complicit, troubles me. Hastings, sipping his tea, frowned. Another person? But Lady Beatrice confessed, Poirot. She admitted to luring Margaret to the sacristy and using the knife. And Thomas Reed owned up to forging the letter. What's left to question? Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching. Mon ami, a confession, it is not always the whole truth. Lady Beatrice, she protects her pride, even in defeat. And Monsieur Reed, his love for her made him blind. But was he blind to everything? There is a detail, a thread, that we have not yet pulled. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Constable Harris, his face weary but determined. Mr. Poirot, Miss Marple, Captain Hastings, he said, tipping his cap. I thought you'd want to know before you leave. Poirot raised a hand, his expression sharp. A moment, Constable. You have news, yes. Something new, perhaps, about Monsieur Reed or the asylum. Harris nodded, his eyes flickering with unease. It's about Evelyn Marsh. She came to me this morning, after you spoke with her. She's been digging through the asylum's records, trying to make sense of things. She found a discrepancy not in the finances, but in the patient logs. One of the patients, a Mr. Victor Langley, Mrs. Langley's nephew, was discharged last month, but there's no record of where he went. And Margaret had made a note about him in her diary, separate from the one you found. Miss Marple's needles paused, her eyes narrowing. Victor Langley. The nephew who supposedly sent the letter Clara took. That's most curious, Constable. Did Evelyn say what Margaret's note was about? Harris pulled a small notebook from his pocket, flipping to a marked page. It was tucked in the back of her diary, almost missed. It reads, VL, West Wing, 凌晨1点, 10:19 meeting with TR. Evelyn thinks Margaret saw Victor Langley in the asylum after his discharge, meeting Thomas Reed. Poirot's eyes widened, his voice sharp. A meeting, at such an hour? And with Monsieur Reed, who claims only to have worked on legal documents. This is no coincidence, Ms. Amos. We must speak with Mademoiselle Marsh at once. They hurried to the asylum, where Evelyn awaited them in the nurse's station, her face pale but resolute. The patient logs were spread before her, alongside Margaret's diary, open to the newly discovered note. I couldn't stop thinking about it, Evelyn said, her voice trembling. Margaret was watching everyone, not just Lady Beatrice. Victor Langley, he was a difficult patient, prone to outbursts, but he was discharged suddenly, and no one questioned it. I think Margaret suspected something. Miss Marple's gaze was gentle but probing. My dear, what sort of man is Victor Langley? And why would he meet Thomas Reed in the West Wing after his discharge? Evelyn hesitated, her hands twisting together. Victor was charming, but unstable. He'd been here for months, treated for nervous exhaustion. Dacre Hargrove signed his discharge, saying he was fit to leave, but Margaret told me once she didn't trust it. She thought Victor was manipulating someone, maybe even Lady Beatrice. Poirot's mustache twitched. And the meeting with Monsieur Reed? What could they have discussed, in secret, at 1 in the morning? Evelyn shook her head. I don't know. But Thomas was always in the library, going over papers. If Victor was there, it wasn't for legal work. Margaret's note is like she was piecing together a puzzle. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Poirot, her mind racing. In Street Mary Mead, I once knew a young man who pretended to be cured to gain his freedom, only to cause trouble later. If Victor Langley was discharged but returned, he could have been part of Lady Beatrice's scheme or a threat to it. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. The threads, they tightened. Victor Langley, a discharged patient, meeting Thomas Reed in secret. Margaret, she saw this, and perhaps she saw too much. We must find this Victor, and we must question Monsieur Reed again. They summoned Thomas Reed to the nurse's station, his nervous demeanor now tinged with exhaustion. His tie was askew, his eyes darting between Poirot and Miss Marple. I told you everything, he said, his voice strained. I forged the letter for Beatrice, yes, but I didn't kill Margaret. I swear it. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. And Victor Langley, monsieur? Margaret's diary places you with him in the West Wing after his discharge. What was your business with a former patient at such an hour? Thomas's face paled, his hand frozen on his tie. Victor. I barely knew him. He came to the library once, asking about his aunt's estate. I told him it wasn't my place to discuss it. That's all. Miss Marple's voice was soft but firm. Mr. Reed, Margaret noted your meeting as significant. She was watching, and she was killed for what she knew. If you're hiding something, it's time to speak. Thomas's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. Victor, he wasn't discharged, not really. Lady Beatrice arranged for his records to show he left, but he was still here, hidden in the West Wing. She was afraid he ruined her plans to sell the asylum. He knew about her dealings, her meetings with buyers. He was threatening to expose her unless she paid him. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And you, monsieur, you helped conceal him? For law, or for profit? Thomas looked away, his voice breaking. Both. I thought I could protect her. But Margaret, she saw him, saw us. I didn't know Beatrice would. I didn't know. The clock struck 11, its chimes echoing through the asylum's silent halls. The unseen thread Victor Langley had emerged, tying the final pieces of the puzzle together. Lady Beatrice's crime was clear, but the shadows of her accomplices lingered, casting doubt on the village's peace. Chapter 14. The final threads. The late morning sun struggled through the heavy clouds over Street Mary's Hollow, casting a pale light on the grey stone walls of Cranford Asylum. Inside the nurse's station, the air was thick with the weight of new revelations. Thomas Reed's confession about Victor Langley, the supposedly discharged patient hidden in the West Wing, had added a final layer to the intricate tapestry of deceit surrounding Margaret Poole's murder. Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings stood together, their minds racing to tie the last threads of the mystery before their departure from the village. Miss Marple's knitting needles clicked softly, a steady rhythm that belied the sharpness of her thoughts. Victor Langley, she murmured, her eyes fixed on the patient logs before them. A man hidden in plain sight, manipulating Lady Beatrice and threatening her plans. In my village, I once knew a young man who played such games, using charm to mask his motives. Margaret saw him, and that made her dangerous. Poirot, his hands clasped behind his back, nodded gravely. Oui, mademoiselle. Victor Langley, he is the shadow behind the crime. Lady Beatrice, she killed to protect her scheme, but Victor, he was the spark. His presence in the West Wing, his meeting with Monsieur Reed was a secret worth killing for. We must find him, and quickly. Hastings, flipping through the patient logs, frowned. But where is he now, Poirot? If he was hiding in the asylum, he could have slipped away after Margaret's death. The village isn't that big, someone must have seen him. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching. Non, mon ami. A man like Victor, he does not flee so easily. He is cunning, manipulative. He stays close, watching, perhaps waiting for his next move. We must search the West Wing, the hidden rooms. And we must speak with Dr. Hargrove. His signature on Victor's false discharge papers implicates him further. They moved to the West Wing, guided by Ellen Marsh, who had regained some composure but still carried the weight of her earlier silence. The corridor was dim, the gas lamps casting eerie shadows on the locked doors. Evelyn hesitated before a small, unmarked room tucked behind the staircase. This was where Victor stayed, she said quietly. Lady Beatrice told me it was for his recovery, but I never believed it. Margaret knew he was here. She brought him meals sometimes. Poirot pushed open the door, revealing a cramped room with a narrow cot, a single chair, and a small table. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and secrecy. On the table lay a notebook, its pages filled with Victor's scrawled handwriting notes about the asylum's land value, potential buyers, and Lady Beatrice's promises of payment. A single line stood out: if she betrays me, I'll tell all B knows the cost. Miss Marple's breath caught. He was blackmailing her, Mr. Poirot. Margaret must have overheard or seen these notes. She was too honest to stay silent. Poirot nodded, slipping the notebook into his pocket. Precisement. Victor Langley, he held the strings, and Lady Beatrice danced. But when Margaret threatened to expose them, Beatrice acted. The knife, the earring, the forged letter, all to protect her secret and his. They summoned Dr. Hargrove, who arrived with a weary expression, his stern demeanor softened by the weight of the past days. You found something else, haven't you? He said, his voice low. I've told you everything I know about the finances. I didn't kill Margaret. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. But you signed Victor Langley's discharge papers, doctor, knowing he remained in the asylum. Why? Were you part of Lady Beatrice's scheme? Hargrove's shoulders slumped, his hand brushing his watch chain. I had no choice. Beatrice said Victor was a danger, that he'd expose the asylum's troubles if we didn't keep him hidden. I thought I was protecting the patients, the staff. I didn't know she'd go so far as murder. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but firm. In my village, I've seen good intentions lead to terrible mistakes. You meant to protect, doctor, but your silence enabled a crime. Did you know Victor was blackmailing her? Hargrove hesitated, then nodded. I suspected. He was always manipulative, charming the staff, even Clara. Margaret mentioned seeing him with Thomas late at night, and I told her to leave it alone. I should have listened to her. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And where is Victor Langley now, doctor? A man like that does not vanish without trace. Hargrove shook his head. I don't know. After Margaret's death, Beatrice said he left the village. I didn't ask questions, I was afraid of the answers. Evelyn, standing nearby, spoke up, her voice trembling. I saw him, yesterday, near the church. He was watching, from the trees. I didn't tell anyone, I was too scared. Poirot's expression hardened. Then we must find him, before he causes more harm. Constable Harris must be informed, and the village searched. They left the west wing, the weight of Victor's shadow heavy on their minds. As they stepped into the grand hall, Constable Harris met them, his face grim. I've got men searching the village, he said. If Victor's here, we'll find him. But there's something else. Clara Harborough just told me she saw Victor in the church during the service, near the sacristy door, just before the scream. Miss Marple's eyes widened. Near the sacristy? Then he may have witnessed the murder or worse, been part of it. Mr. Poirot, we must consider if Lady Beatrice acted alone, or if Victor played a role. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The threads, they are almost tied. Victor Langley, he is the final piece. If he was in the church, he saw Lady Beatrice kill Margaret, or he helped her. Either way, his silence is his power. The clock struck noon, its chimes echoing through the asylum. The search for Victor Langley began, the village stirred into action by Harris's men. Miss Marple, Poirot, and Hastings stood at the edge of the asylum's grounds, their eyes scanning the horizon. The mystery was nearly solved, but the final threads, Victor's role, his motives, his whereabouts, remained just out of reach, hidden in the shadows of Street Mary's Hollow. Chapter 15. The final reckoning. The early afternoon sun hung low over Street Mary's Hollow, its light struggling to pierce the lingering mist that clung to the village like a shroud. Cranford Asylum stood silent, its grey stone walls a mute witness to the unraveling of its secrets. Miss Jane Marple, Hercule Poirot, and Captain Hastings stood at the edge of the asylum's grounds, their eyes scanning the fields and woods for any sign of Victor Langley, the elusive figure whose shadow had loomed over the murder of Margaret Poole. The revelation of his presence in the church, near the sacristy door at the time of the crime, had cast a new light on the case, suggesting that Lady Beatrice Cranford's confession might not be the full story. Miss Marple's kneeling bed rested at her feet, her hands still as she gazed toward the church spire. Victor Langley, she said softly, a man who manipulates and hides, yet remains close enough to watch. In Street Mary Mead, I once knew a young man who thrived on secrets, always one step ahead until he made a single mistake. Victor's mistake, I think, was staying too near the scene of his crime. Poirot, his head tilted precisely, nodded. Oui, mademoiselle. Victor Langley, he is the puppet master who pulled the strings, but Lady Beatrice, she wielded the knife. His presence in the church, it suggests he was more than a bystander. We must find him, and the truth will be complete. Hastings, his coat flapping in the chilly breeze, looked skeptical. But Poirot, if Lady Beatrice confessed, why would Victor stay? He's got what he wanted, her silence, her downfall. Why risk being caught? Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mustache twitching. Because, mon ami, a man like Victor does not walk away from power. He blackmailed Lady Beatrice, threatened to expose her plans to sell the asylum. But when Margaret Poole discovered him, his secret became a danger. I believe he was in the sacristy, not to kill, but to ensure Lady Beatrice did. He is the shadow behind the murder. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from the woods beyond the church. Constable Harris, flanked by two officers, emerged, dragging a disheveled figure in a tattered coat. Victor Langley, his handsome face marred by a scowl, struggled briefly before slumping in defeat. His eyes, sharp and calculating, darted between Poirot and Miss Marple, as if measuring his chances of escape, found him hiding in the old mill, Harris said, his voice grim. He was trying to slip out of the village, but one of the villagers spotted him. Poirot stepped forward, his gaze unrelenting. Monsieur Langley, you have much to answer for. You were in the church during the service, near the sacristy door, when Margaret Poole was murdered. You saw Lady Beatrice strike the fatal blow, did you not? Victor's lips curled into a sneer, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. You got nothing on me, Poirot. Beatrice killed her, I didn't touch the knife. She was desperate, said Margaret would ruin everything. I just encouraged her to act. Miss Marple's voice was gentle but piercing. Encourage, Mr. Langley. Or coerced? Margaret's diary noted your meeting with Thomas Reed in the West Wing, after your supposed discharge. You were blackmailing Lady Beatrice, weren't you? Threatening to expose her plans unless she paid you. Victor's sneer faded, his hands clenching. She owed me. The asylum was my prison for months, and she profited from it. When I found out about her deal to sell the land, I wanted my share. Margaret caught me in the West Wing. She was too nosy for her own good. I told Beatrice to handle it, or I'd tell everyone. Poirot's mustache twitched. And so, you followed her to the church, to the sacristy, to ensure she silenced Margaret. You were there, monsieur, when the knife struck. The wax smudge on the doorframe, it was not only from Lady Beatrice's gloves, but from yours, N.S.C. Pa. You wore gloves to avoid leaving prints, but the wax betrayed you both. Victor's eyes widened, his bravado crumbling. I didn't kill her. I was just watching. Beatrice said she talked to Margaret, scared her into silence. I didn't know she'd use the knife until it was done. Miss Marple's eyes softened, though her tone was firm. In my village, I've seen how greed and fear can twist even the strongest bonds. You used Lady Beatrice's fear to control her, Mr. Langley, and in doing so, you shared her guilt. Harris stepped forward, his face stern. Victor Langley, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and blackmail. You'll answer for your part in this. As the officers led Victor away, Poirot turned to Miss Marple and Hastings, his expression somber. The final thread, it is tied. Lady Beatrice struck the blow, but Victor Langley, he was the catalyst. Without his blackmail, Margaret Poole might still live. Hastings shook his head, his voice heavy. What a wretched pair. Beatrice with her pride, Victor with his greed. And poor Margaret, caught in their web. Miss Marple nodded, her gaze distant. It's a sad truth, Captain, that the quiet ones, the ones who see too much, often pay the highest price. Margaret's duty was her downfall, but her nose led us to the truth. The clock in the village square struck 2, its chimes carrying over the fields. The trio gathered their belongings, preparing to board the train back to London. The village of Street, Mary's Hollow lay quiet, its people beginning to heal from the wounds of the sacred church slaughter. The asylum, under Deher, Hargrove's chastened leadership and Evelyn Marsh's renewed dedication, would survive, though its scars would linger. As they walked to the station, Poirot paused, his eyes on the church spire. The little grey cells, they have done their work. But the heart, it feels the weight of justice. We leave this village with order restored, but not with joy. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her knitting bag slung over her arm. Justice is never joyful, Mr. Poirot, but it is necessary. And in Street Mary's Hollow, as in Street Mary Mead, life will go on, one small truth at a time. Hastings, ever the optimist, clapped Poirot on the shoulder. Well, we've done our bit. Now, how about a proper lunch when we get to London? I'm famished. Poirot's eyes twinkled, a rare lightness breaking through. A lunch, Hastings. Perhaps, but only if it is accompanied by a tisane of the finest quality. With a final glance at the village, the trio boarded the train, leaving behind the mystery solved, a killer unmasked, and a village forever changed by the relentless pursuit of truth.